what I can do on number 4, if that one is causing the most problem, is to offer, in other words, offer something else.
But keep the dollar value.
Well,
They
still
don't-
have
number 4 has no
$15
dollar value.
You're locked into that. In other words, cost out, to keep the schedule so that, I mean, maybe one way to approach this is, if you're saying that you are willing to allow class sizes in the high school in elective classes to rise beyond the 30 to 32 where they are now, and to enter into some kind of a impact bargaining right away, or make sure you can hire additional teachers, but something else goes. For example, go back and look at those elementary classes, and are you willing to raise 1 or 2 elementary classes to a 27 range, and do some spot redistricting? Because I could look at that, some spot redistricting.
So is it fair to say that as a whole, the consensus is that these recommendations make sense, but that we reserve the right to...
Distasteful as they had.
I do want to make clear, on the early release days, I think Maureen is still looking for an answer. I heard at least 3 of us, and I don't know where Nicole stands. I think Wednesday is going to be it unless something happens. I think that makes the most sense. It's easiest for everybody to understand, and people can start planning on that now if the override doesn't pass. Is that fair to say, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me because I know, several single parents where it's a real hardship to be able to schedule additional childcare. But, on the other hand, it's a very visible, immediate impact that everybody can understand. I'm actually, very concerned about eliminating the mentor program, given that about half our teaching staff is only in their first 3 years of teaching. And I'm worried that the turnover is going to continue. And we're not going to have that many veteran teachers left to mentor the newer ones.
Well, if we don't have them left, we can't have a mentor program. So.
Right. So, I would love to see if that has to go, it would be nice if a voluntary mentor program sprung up in its place, but I am not optimistic that would occur.
It might in ideal situations, like the volunteers with the leadership program tonight. But when you stress out a teacher to the point where they've got 27 elementary age kids or 35 teenagers, and then you take away their professional development, you're not going to have them signing up to any of these added.
No.
And all these things that they sign up to do just benefit the kids.
I think we pretty much have a consensus that these eight items make sense, and the half day on Wednesdays. I just want to say, we just to make the point clear again, that the non-override budget does not even allow us to meet contractual obligations. That's just carrying over the teachers we have now to the teachers next year. So you see where our problem begins.
It's not even doing that. I mean, we're talking about an available funds budget, right?
Right.
If the override doesn't pass.
Right.
So it's not necessarily carrying over
No,
at all.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It doesn't allow, if we kept the same number of teachers, we couldn't keep the same number of
Can't.
teachers with the available funds budget. The other thing I wanted to say is, we're talking about foreign languages tonight, and I probably should do some research before I make this statement, but I'd be willing to bet that many other high schools in this area offer more than French and Spanish. I'd be willing to go out on a really thin limb on that one. And we just don't, we're not giving kids the variety of courses that they require at the high school, and we're not starting them early enough. We want our kids to be competitive, Usually you have to be pretty good at a foreign language. You're not gonna become fluent usually if you start your freshman year in high school. You're just taking it as a requirement. We have some of the highest fees in the state. Jeff?
Just want to remind you too, if I may, some of the things we talked about at the public hearings a while back. Some of these proposed cuts have been pretty public for a couple months now, and it's been pretty well public knowledge as far as the middle school lost that whole elective, the Wednesday half days. Some of these things have gotten a lot of attention, and I think it's really important that you be very firm about this, very consistent, and just be as clear as you possibly can be on what kind of ramifications are of this thing failing. And I think it's not going to be very helpful to the cause, to the election, to your credibility to waffle on some of these things that you've been very public about.
I'm not saying I hope we have to do these things, but if the override does not pass, we have to implement these cuts. And we're operating at a shortage right now, a shortage of staff. That's why we're trying to add staff just to keep up with the enrollment. And if we don't get the override, these cuts have to be made.
David, when you say that you would allow electives to go beyond 30, I'm assuming that there's got to be caps in place as far as gym classes and safety, and lab or art rooms and stations to work at?
Well,
I mean, besides the contract that says so many students,
oh,
are there,
well, we
there's
have
got
to,
to be
we
something.
do think about it.
I mean,
We
you
do
can't
look
have
at that.
40 teenagers in the gym class
Right.
playing basketball, someone will get hurt. So
Right.
there's got to be some flexibility for John to be able to say
That's
this
true.
class is shut down.
Any other comments? Steve?
All of these are odious. I think if anybody's been paying attention, they realize that. I think from where we sit, it's easier to understand how odious some of them are. The department heads provide cohesion. They provide a measure of mentoring. The mentor program itself, over half of our teachers are relatively young and need this kind of attention. And between the mentoring program and the professional development, those are two ways in which we've managed to stretch our dollars to achieve the results that we do in North Reading. Those are some of the best investments we make, and those are both going to be suffering. The loss of instructional time is awful, and perhaps the worst things are the cutting in the foreign languages and music, because it's very hard to recapture and restore those programs later. Back in 1991, when we lost 1 out of every 7 people in the system, it took years for the music program to recover. The band used to be a perennial award winner competitions. You can see the trophies in the display cabinets, and then there was a very lean period because we lost that continuity. And yet, when we look at what's in the budget and what our alternatives are, there's very little option. Almost 80% of our budget is payroll. We have very few administrators. We have mostly teaching people. We have to cut some of them to balance the budget. We have very little that we spend on supplies and the like. Of the 21% that isn't payroll, the biggest single chunk is the special education costs between tuition and transportation. The next biggest is transportation for buses, and the portion of transportation for regular transportation that we're not obliged to provide by law, we recover on fees. We can't save anything there. Our discretionary budget is so small. We're talking about reducing it by 5%, and it's already too small. There's just no place for us to turn accept these really odious cuts. I hope it doesn't come to this. But
Just to close, you never can put aside the ability to pay, because I know that an override hurts in everybody's pocketbook. But I know there are a lot of skeptics out there, but when you spend per pupil so low in terms of the state average, it means you're not spending a lot in any area. You're not spending a lot in any area. So when you have to make a cut, it hurts more. And I think that's important for everybody out there to remember. We're not spending a lot in any area of the school system. We're spending what we have, but it's not a lot. And that's why the cuts, as Steve put it, I think, really well, are so odious. So we'll be talking about this more in the next few meetings, next
Well,
week
you have
leading
one
up to,
more.
leading up to the June 5th vote.
Right.
Oh, I just want to make
Go
a
ahead,
quick point
Nicole.
that none of us like tax increases, because we all live in this town. We can't have somebody from Andover come in and be on the school board in North Reading. We all live here. Supporting an override means, supporting an increase to our own tax bills. So, I'm not thrilled with the idea, but until the state steps up, if I want the kids in this town to have the quality of education that they deserve, then, I personally am going to support an override budget.
So I'm glad we had this discussion, as difficult as it has been, but I hope the committee knows that in the coming weeks, I would intend to speak about these kinds of program changes under the theme of tough times and tough choices. I don't want to deviate from this,
No.
so I don't intend to, come up with something else, but I think your consensus is important because it gives permission, in a way, for me to be able to speak either to staff or to parent groups or to communicate what our program could be and where I see it going. Okay, so that's why it's here in the detail that it is, because I wouldn't want to surprise anyone, and I would never add anything more to this. And if there's something you feel really difficult to swallow, then I'll take it off. But understand that I would have to replace it with something else.
She's
Yeah.
just distasteful, huh?
I think, for me, the only thing that I could fight with is that number 4, and it's not a question of,
That's right.
it doesn't have the dollar impact, it's just a question of whether you let the class sizes rise, and I think we have to do that.
Yeah, number 4 and number 8 are kind of on a seesaw, the reduction of 11 students versus
Yeah.
class sizes.
Enrollment group, not
Okay. Let's move on to routine matters, bills and payrolls. I don't see a red folder tonight.
I don't see Carl tonight.
No, I don't see one either, so.
I think this-
expect I'm also
as-
getting calls from
it's-
Kathy.
No, as the new chairman, this is going to be a new policy. We're just not going to be signing any bills and
It's the end
payrolls
of the fiscal
anymore.
year.
It's the end of the
Maybe we
fiscal-
can't
yeah, maybe we have no more
It's
bills,
the end of the fiscal year.
no more payroll.
Hey.
You've already put us in the bankruptcy now.
Minutes.
Minutes.
We have the open, regular meeting of the school committee open session, April 25th, 2007.
Move to approve with one correction.
Okay.
The time of adjournment is wrong.
Yeah, we had
On the very
right,
last page.
Right.
Hold on.
We adjourned at 10:55.
Right, it says 9:46.
Page
Page 8.
Page 8.
Because
Well,
I
it was
didn't
to
know the
adjourn,
time
we were
until I went
adjourning
and
to
left the
executive session.
Right, no, but that's 10:55 is when we adjourned. 10:14, we went to executive session, so we couldn't have adjourned at 9:46.
Right.
So it should be 10:55 for adjournment, David, on page 8. Because if you look
That
at
could
the,
be my problem.
because if you look at the executive session, it says we adjourned at 10:55. Yeah, Pat wasn't here, Pat was sleeping, so.
Yeah, it should say Pat went home at
Right.
9:46. Yeah.
So that should be 10:55, because it's consistent with when when it says we adjourned to the executive session.
What I'm saying is I wondered if the 10:14 was accurate.
Oh,